The dying rays of sunset painted Evanston, Wyoming Territory with crimson and gold when Lillian Dawson stepped off the westbound train, clutching nothing but a battered carpet bag and the address of her late aunt's boarding house. The year was 1876, and the dusty frontier town represented her last chance at a life worth living. The station platform emptied quickly, leaving Lillian alone with the cooling evening air and the distant sound of piano music drifting from saloons along the main street. At 24, she was neither young enough to be considered marriageable nor old enough to be respected as a spinster. The smallpox epidemic that had claimed her parents in Chicago had also left faint scars across her once flawless complexion, enough to make suitable men look away, but not enough to elicit open pity. "Miss, you need directions." The station master's voice interrupted her thoughts. "Town ain't safe for a lady alone after dark." "I'm looking for 324 Willow Street," Lillian replied, adjusting her plain bonnet. "The Willow Creek boarding house." The older man's expression softened. "Ah, Sarah Miller's place. God rest her soul, heard her niece was coming to take over." His eyes narrowed. "That'd be you then," Lillian nodded. "Yes, sir. My aunt's solicitor wrote that the establishment is mine now, though I've never seen it." "Well, it's 3 blocks north and 2 east, decent place. Your aunt ran a tight ship." He paused. "Word of advice, Miss Dawson. This town's full of miners, cowboys, and railroad men. They respect boundaries, but only when they're drawn clear as day." "Thank you for your concern," Lillian said with a practiced smile that betrayed none of her uncertainty. "I managed a millinery shop in Chicago. I'm accustomed to difficult customers." The station master chuckled. "Millinery shop, you say? Well, this ain't Chicago, miss. Your first difficult customer here might be carrying a colt." 30 minutes later, Lillian stood before a 2-story clapboard house with Willow Creek boarding house painted in faded letters above the porch. The building wasn't grand, but it was well maintained, with clean windows and a swept porch. For the first time since leaving Illinois, Lillian felt a flicker of hope. Inside, she discovered 5 occupied rooms and a small apartment that had been her aunt's, now hers. The boarders were mostly older men who worked for the railroad, plus one elderly widow. All seemed relieved that the boarding house would continue operating. By the end of her first week, Lillian had settled into a routine. She rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for her boarders, spent mornings cleaning and afternoons baking or mending. The work was harder than she'd anticipated, but the exhaustion kept her from dwelling on all she'd lost. Her solitude was interrupted one stormy evening when urgent pounding shook the front door. Lillian opened it to find Sheriff Wilson supporting a blood-soaked man. "Evening, Miss Dawson," the sheriff said grimly. "Need a room for this fellow. Doc Harmon's place is full with influenza patients, and the hotel won't take him on account of, well, his reputation." The wounded man's head hung forward, his face obscured by rain-darkened hair, but his tall frame and the worn leather chaps marked him as a cowhand. "What happened to him?" Lillian asked, stepping aside to let them enter. "Knife fight over at the Silver Dollar. Other fellows dead." "This one's innocent, acted in self-defense, clear as day. Got witnesses." Sheriff Wilson grunted as they maneuvered the semi-conscious man through the doorway. "Name's Samuel Sloan, foreman at the Big Sky Ranch." Lillian led them to her only vacant room. "I'm not sure I'm equipped to care for someone so gravely wounded." "It looks worse than it is," the sheriff assured her. "Doc already stitched him up, just needs rest away from the noise. Said to keep the wound clean and change the bandages daily." With that, the sheriff departed, leaving Lillian staring at the stranger in her best room. Samuel Sloan lay still, his breathing shallow but steady. His face, now visible in the lamplight, was all hard angles and weather-beaten planes. Lillian guessed him to be in his mid-30s, though the lines around his eyes suggested he'd seen more hardship than most men his age. She dampened a cloth and carefully wiped the dried blood from his forehead, revealing a fresh gash that had been neatly stitched. His eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "Mr. Sloan," she said softly. "Can you hear me?" No response came, but his breathing seemed to ease. Lillian sighed and settled into the chair beside the bed. It would be a long night. Samuel Sloan woke the next morning with a growl of pain that brought Lillian running. She found him attempting to sit up, one hand pressed to his bandaged side. "You shouldn't be moving," she said, hurrying to his bedside. "You'll tear your stitches." Dark blue eyes, cold as a winter sky, fixed on her face. "Who the hell are you?" "I'm Lillian Dawson, proprietor of this boarding house. Sheriff Wilson brought you here last night." Samuel fell back against the pillows, wincing. "Wilson should have left me at the saloon." "To bleed to death on a barroom floor." Lillian arched an eyebrow. "How dignified." A humorless laugh escaped him, followed by a grimace of pain. "Dignity ain't exactly my concern, madam." "Well, it's mine. You're in my best room, Mr. Sloan, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't expire in it." She poured water into a glass and held it out. "Drink." He studied her for a long moment before accepting the water. "You're new in town." "I arrived last week. My Aunt Sarah left me this place when she passed." "Sarah Miller was your aunt?" Samuel's expression softened marginally. "She was a good woman, so everyone tells me." Lillian reached for the bandage at his side. "I need to change this dressing." Samuel caught her wrist with surprising strength. "I can manage, don't be stubborn. I've seen blood before. I don't need your help." Lillian pulled her wrist free. "Everyone needs help sometimes, Mr. Sloan. Even surly cowboys who think they're invincible." A flicker of something amusement perhaps crossed his face before the stony mask returned. "Fine. Be quick about it." Lillian worked efficiently, removing the blood-soaked bandage to reveal an 8-inch gash along his ribs that had been closed with neat stitches. She cleaned the wound with carbolic solution, applied fresh salve, and rewrapped it with clean strips of linen. Throughout the process, Samuel remained silent, his jaw clenched against the pain. Only when she'd finished did he speak again. "Thank you. You're welcome. Are you hungry?" He shook his head. "Just tired." "Then rest. I'll check on you later." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Miss Dawson." "Yes. Lock your doors at night. This town." He hesitated. "It ain't safe for a woman alone." "So I've been told," Lillian replied. "But I'm beginning to think there's nowhere that truly is." Over the next 3 days, Samuel Sloan proved to be a difficult patient. He refused most offers of help, insisted on paying double the room rate to cover the trouble, and spoke only when necessary. By the 4th day, he was moving around, though the effort clearly cost him pain he wouldn't acknowledge. Lillian found him on the porch after breakfast, staring at the street with restless eyes. "The doctor said you should rest for at least a week," she reminded him, setting a cup of coffee on the small table beside his chair. "Doctors say a lot of things." Samuel took the coffee without looking at her. "I need to get back to the ranch." "Is someone waiting for you?" A muscle in his jaw tightened. "Just cattle and cowboys, but they're my responsibility." "Surely they can manage a few more days without you." "Maybe. But I can't manage a few more days cooped up in town." He finally turned to look at her. "No offense intended to your establishment, Miss Dawson. None taken." Lillian settled into the chair opposite his. "Though I wonder what you're running from." Samuel's gaze sharpened. "What makes you think I'm running?" "Most people who are hurt want to rest. You seem determined to push through pain that would keep others bedridden." He looked away. "I've had worse." "That's not an answer. It's all you're getting." He drained his coffee and stood carefully, one hand automatically going to his injured side. "I'll be leaving tomorrow morning. That's foolish. Wouldn't be the first foolish thing I've done." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Probably won't be the last." True to his word, Samuel Sloan departed the next morning before sunrise. Lillian found a stack of bills on the nightstand, far more than he owed, along with a briefly scrawled note. "Thank you for your kindness. SS." She told herself the hollow feeling in her chest was simply concern for a patient leaving medical care too soon. It certainly couldn't be disappointment that the surly cowboy hadn't even said goodbye properly. 2 weeks passed. Lillian threw herself into improving the boarding house, planting flower beds along the front walk and repainting the faded sign. She met the townspeople, attended Sunday services at the small Methodist church, and slowly began to feel less like an outsider. Then came the night that changed everything. Lillian was awakened by the acrid smell of smoke. She rushed from her bed to find the hallway filling with thick black clouds. Flames were already consuming the back staircase. Fire! She screamed, pounding on doors as she made her way through the hall. "Everyone out! Fire!" Her boarders emerged in various states of undress, coughing, and disoriented. Lillian herded them toward the front stairs, counting heads in the confusion. 5, all accounted for. They stumbled into the street as neighbors began to gather. Someone had already summoned the volunteer fire brigade, but Lillian knew with sickening certainty that her aunt's legacy, her own fresh start, would soon be reduced to ashes. "My photographs, Mrs. Winters," the elderly widow cried suddenly. "My late husband's photographs are still inside." Before Lillian could stop her, the old woman turned back toward the burning building. Without thinking, Lillian followed, catching Mrs. Winters on the porch steps. "I'll get them," she promised. "Where are they?" "Dresser drawer, blue tin box," Mrs. Winters sobbed. Lillian pulled her shawl over her mouth and nose and plunged back into the smoke-filled house. The heat was overwhelming, but the front stairs were still passable. She climbed quickly, keeping low to avoid the worst of the smoke. Mrs. Winters' room was at the end of the hall. Lillian crawled toward it, eyes streaming from the smoke. The blue tin box was exactly where Mrs. Winters had said. Lillian clutched it to her chest and turned to leave, but a thunderous crash shook the building as part of the roof collapsed. The hallway was now blocked by burning debris. Lillian retreated to the room, coughing violently. The window. It was her only chance. She stumbled toward it, fumbling with the latch as dark spots danced in her vision. The window finally gave way and Lillian leaned out, gulping fresh air. "Help!" she called weakly, her voice nearly drowned by the roar of the flames. The ground below seemed impossibly far away. Smoke billowed around her, making it hard to see if anyone heard her cries. The tin box slipped from her grasp as dizziness overtook her. Her last conscious thought was that she'd failed her aunt, failed herself, failed the people who depended on her. Then strong arms were lifting her, carrying her through the smoke. A familiar voice, rough with urgency. "I've got you. Keep breathing." When Lillian opened her eyes, she was lying on the grass across the street, and Samuel Sloan was leaning over her, his face blackened with soot, blue eyes intense with concern. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met," he said, when he saw she was conscious. "What were you thinking, going back in there?" Lillian tried to answer but could only cough. Samuel supported her as she sat up, his hand gentle on her back. "Mrs. Winters," she finally managed. "Her photographs." "Here." Samuel reached beside him and picked up the dented tin box. "Dropped it out the window before I got to you. Old lady's over the moon about it." Lillian looked past him to where the boarding house was now fully engulfed in flames. The fire brigade was working to keep the blaze from spreading to neighboring buildings, but her home and business were clearly beyond saving. "Everything's gone," she whispered. Samuel's expression tightened. "Things can be replaced. Not everything." Tears streaked through the soot on her face. That was all I had. Before Samuel could respond, Dr. Harmon arrived to check on Lillian. After a thorough examination, he pronounced her suffering from smoke inhalation but otherwise unharmed. "You're lucky Sloan showed up when he did," the doctor said, packing away his stethoscope. "Man rode straight into town and went up that burning staircase like the devil himself was after him." Lillian looked around, but Samuel was nowhere to be seen. "Where did he go?" "Said something about securing accommodations," Sheriff Wilson answered, approaching with a blanket that he draped around Lillian's shoulders. "Don't you worry, Miss Dawson. Evanston takes care of its own, and you're one of us now." By morning, the boarding house was nothing but smoldering ruins. Lillian stood before it, exhausted and hollow-eyed, as townsfolk picked through the debris in search of salvageable items. "Miss Dawson." She turned to find Samuel Sloan leading his horse toward her. Unlike the previous night, he was clean-shaven, dressed in a fresh shirt and vest, though the lines of fatigue around his eyes suggested he hadn't slept. "Mr. Sloan." Her voice was hoarse from the smoke. "I didn't get to thank you properly." He dismissed her gratitude with a shake of his head. "Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't, you did." Lillian managed a wan smile. "What brings you back to town? I thought you couldn't wait to leave. Had business with the cattle broker." His gaze moved from her face to the ruins behind her. "Heard you refused the hotel's offer of a room last night. I stayed with Mrs. Winters at her sister's house." Lillian wrapped her arms around herself. "I couldn't accept charity when my boarders were also displaced." Samuel studied her for a long moment. "I've got a proposition for you." "I'm not sure I'm in a position to entertain propositions, Mr. Sloan. Hear me out." He shifted his weight, seemingly uncomfortable. "Big Sky Ranch needs a cook and housekeeper. Previous one quit 2 months ago to get married. It's hard work, but the pay's fair, and you'd have your own cabin on the property." Lillian stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You're offering me a job, it ain't charity," he said firmly. "Ranch hands work better when they're well-fed and the place is falling apart without a woman's touch." "You'd be earning your keep." "I see." Lillian considered her options, which were admittedly few. The insurance money would take months to arrive if it came at all. She had no family to turn to, and while the townspeople were kind, their generosity wouldn't sustain her indefinitely. "How far is this ranch?" "About 15 miles west. Good land, good water." A hint of pride crept into his voice. "Owner's hardly ever there. Left me in charge 5 years ago and only visits once or twice a year." "And the other ranch hands, how many are there?" 6 regular hands plus a couple seasonal workers, all decent men." His eyes hardened. "I don't tolerate disrespect toward women on my ranch." The possessive "my ranch" didn't escape Lillian's notice, nor did the protective edge to his words. Despite his gruff exterior, Samuel Sloan clearly felt responsible for those under his care. "When would you need me to start?" "Today, if you're willing. Got the wagon ready to take you out there." He nodded toward Main Street, where a farm wagon waited. "Thought we could stop at the Mercantile first, get you whatever supplies you need." Lillian took a deep breath, looking once more at the charred remains of her boarding house. What choice did she really have? "Very well, Mr. Sloan, I accept your offer." The journey to Big Sky Ranch was largely silent. Samuel drove the wagon with Lillian beside him, her few salvaged possessions and newly purchased supplies secured in the back. The terrain gradually changed from the flat land around Evanston to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. "It's beautiful," Lillian remarked as they crested a rise that revealed a sweeping view of the valley below. Samuel nodded. Best grazing land in the territory. In the distance, Lillian could make out buildings clustered near a meandering creek, with cattle scattered across the surrounding pastures. After another hour of travel, they arrived at the ranch proper, a collection of well-maintained structures centered around a handsome two-story house built of logs and stone. "That's the main house," Samuel explained, guiding the wagon toward a smaller cabin about 50 yards away. "Owner built it bigger than necessary. You'll have the run of the kitchen and common areas. Your cabin's there." The cabin proved to be a cozy one-room dwelling with a small porch. Inside was a bed, table with 2 chairs, cast iron stove, and a bureau. Simple but clean, with curtains at the windows and a colorful quilt on the bed. "Previous housekeeper fixed it up," Samuel said, watching Lillian's reaction carefully. "If there's anything you need to change." "It's perfect," she assured him, surprising herself with how much she meant it. After the chaos of the fire, the cabin's orderly simplicity was deeply appealing. "I'll let you get settled then. Dinner's usually at 6. Cook for 8-7 hands plus yourself." Samuel lingered in the doorway. "Kitchen's fully stocked. Anything you need, just add it to the supply list." After he left, Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by how quickly her life had changed. Yesterday, she'd been a businesswoman with a home and purpose. Today, she was a cook and housekeeper on a cattle ranch, working for a man she barely knew. Yet something about the cabin, the land, the wide open sky visible through the windows, felt right in a way Evanston never had. For the first time since arriving in Wyoming Territory, Lillian felt she could breathe freely. At precisely 6 o'clock, Lillian rang the dinner bell outside the main house. The ranch hands arrived promptly, filing into the dining room with freshly washed faces and damp hair. Samuel introduced them briefly: Tom, Jake, Hank, Miguel, Charlie, and old Pete, who served as the ranch's blacksmith. The men were initially wary, responding to her greeting with cautious nods, but their demeanor changed dramatically when she uncovered the meal. Roast beef, potatoes, carrots, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. "Madam, if this is how you cook regular, I might never leave this ranch," Charlie, the youngest hand, declared after his first bite. "Watch your manners," Samuel warned, but there was no real heat behind the words. The meal passed pleasantly, with the men sharing stories of their day's work. Lillian noticed how they all deferred to Samuel, whose quiet authority seemed effortless. She also noticed how little he contributed to the conversation, observing rather than participating. When the others had finished and filed out to the bunkhouse, Samuel remained behind, helping Lillian clear the table despite her protests. "You don't need to do this," she said as he stacked plates. "My mother taught me to help with dishes," he replied simply. "Said no work was beneath a man if it needed doing. She sounds like a wise woman." Samuel's hand stilled momentarily. She was. The past tense hung in the air between them, but Lillian didn't press. Instead, she washed while he dried, working together in companionable silence until the kitchen was spotless again. "Thank you for dinner," Samuel said formally as he prepared to leave. The men appreciated it. "And you?" Lillian couldn't help asking. "Did you enjoy it?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Best meal I've had in years." With that, he departed, leaving Lillian staring after him, wondering about the sorrow that seemed to shadow his every word. Days at Big Sky Ranch fell into a rhythm. Lillian rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hands, spent mornings cleaning the main house, afternoons baking and preparing dinner, and evenings mending clothing or reading by lamplight in her cabin. The work was hard but satisfying, and the men treated her with increasing respect as they grew accustomed to her presence. Samuel remained an enigma. He was unfailingly polite but maintained a careful distance, rarely engaging in conversation beyond what was necessary for the running of the ranch. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an unreadable expression, only to look away when she met his gaze. 2 weeks after her arrival, Lillian was gathering eggs in the henhouse when rapid hoofbeats announced a rider approaching at speed. She stepped outside to see Samuel dismounting from his lathered horse, his expression grim. "What's happened?" she asked, setting her basket aside. "Rustlers hit the north pasture, took 20 head and wounded Jake." Samuel's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Need bandages and hot water." "He took a bullet in the shoulder." Lillian rushed to the main house to prepare. Minutes later, 2 ranch hands arrived supporting Jake between them, his shirt soaked with blood. They laid him on the kitchen table at Lillian's direction. "Bullet went clean through," Samuel reported, rolling up his sleeves. "But he's lost a lot of blood." Lillian worked efficiently, cutting away Jake's shirt and cleaning the wound while Samuel held the young cowboy down. Jake had passed out from the pain, which was a blessing as she poured whiskey over the injury. "You've done this before," Samuel observed as she prepared to stitch the wound. "My father was a doctor," Lillian explained, threading a needle. "I assisted him sometimes. Why didn't you say so?" "You didn't ask." She began the delicate work of closing the wound. "And anyway, a woman doctor isn't exactly welcomed with open arms, even in Chicago." Samuel watched her skilled movements with newfound respect. "Your father taught you well." He wanted a son to follow in his footsteps. Lillian tied off a stitch. "He got me instead, so he made the best of it." When the wound was bandaged and Jake settled in the spare bedroom, Samuel and Lillian retreated to the kitchen. She washed the blood from her hands while he poured 2 glasses of whiskey. "Drink," he said, pushing one toward her. "You look like you need it." Lillian accepted the glass and took a small sip, feeling the liquor burn down to her stomach. "Will Jake be all right, thanks to you?" Samuel downed his whiskey in one swallow. "Could have been much worse." "What about the rustlers?" His expression darkened. "We'll find them." "Is that wise? They're clearly dangerous. So am I." The cold certainty in his voice sent a shiver down Lillian's spine. "No one threatens what's mine." Before she could respond, Samuel stood and headed for the door. "I'm gathering the men. We'll ride at first light. Samuel." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and it stopped him in his tracks. "Be careful." He looked back at her, something unreadable flickering in his blue eyes. "Always am." The rustler hunt lasted 3 days. Lillian tended to Jake, whose fever broke on the 2nd day, signaling that infection hadn't set in. She tried not to worry about Samuel and the others, but found herself watching the horizon more often than necessary. When they finally returned, driving the recovered cattle ahead of them, Lillian was hanging laundry outside her cabin. She shaded her eyes against the setting sun, counting riders. 6. All had returned safely. Samuel dismounted stiffly, his face dust-streaked and stubbled. He spoke briefly to the other hands before walking toward Lillian, leading his horse. "You found them," she said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "Found them, dealt with them." His expression revealed nothing. "Cattle are back where they belong." "Are you?" She hesitated. "Did anyone get hurt?" "Scratches and bruises. Nothing serious." Samuel ran a hand through his dirt-caked hair. "How's Jake?" "Improving. Fever's gone, and he's complaining about being bedridden, which I take as a good sign." A hint of a smile touched Samuel's lips. "Complaining cowboys generally live." "You should rest," Lillian said, noting the exhaustion evident in the slump of his shoulders. "I'll have a bath ready for you in 20 minutes and dinner after that." He looked as though he might argue, but simply nodded instead. "Thank you." Lillian prepared the bath in the washroom off the kitchen. heating water and adding a few drops of pine oil, a small luxury she'd purchased on her last trip to town. When Samuel entered, freshly shaven but still trail-worn, his eyes widened slightly at the steaming tub. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," he said. "It's no trouble. You've been riding hard for 3 days." Lillian laid out a towel and clean clothes she'd taken from his room. "Dinner will be ready when you are." She turned to leave, but Samuel caught her hand. His palm was rough against her skin, calloused from years of roping and riding. "Lillian." His voice was low, almost hesitant. "I don't know how to thank you. For a bath and dinner. It's my job, for all of it, taking care of Jake, running this place better than it's ever been run." His blue eyes held hers. "For caring." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of the tentative bond that had been forming these past weeks. Lillian felt her heartbeat quicken. "You should enjoy your bath while the water's hot," she said softly, gently withdrawing her hand from his. "We can talk over dinner." But they didn't talk, not really. By the time Samuel emerged, clean and more relaxed, the other hands had returned from the bunkhouse for dinner. The meal was lively with accounts of the rustler chase, and though Samuel sat at the head of the table as always, he remained mostly silent, his eyes occasionally finding Lillian's across the room. Later that night, unable to sleep, Lillian sat on her porch watching the stars. The night was clear and cool, with a quarter moon providing just enough light to silver the landscape. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Samuel approaching until he was nearly upon her. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Please." Lillian pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Couldn't sleep, too much to think about. Samuel settled into the chair with a tired sigh. "Beautiful night." "It is. I never saw stars like this in Chicago. Too many lights, too many buildings." He leaned back, stretching his long legs out before him. "Out here, nothing gets between you and the sky." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft hooting of an owl, the rustle of wind through the aspens. "I was married once," Samuel said abruptly, his voice so quiet Lillian nearly missed the words. She turned to look at him, but his gaze remained fixed on the stars. "I didn't know. No reason you would. It was a long time ago." He drew a deep breath. "Her name was Emily. We were young. I was 22, she was 19. Met her in Denver where I was working as a drover. Prettiest girl I'd ever seen, with a laugh that could make flowers grow." Lillian said nothing, sensing he needed to tell this story in his own way. "We were married 2 months after we met. Bought a small spread near Fort Collins. Nothing fancy, but it was ours." A muscle worked in Samuel's jaw. "Emily was expecting our first child when the raid happened." "Raid?" Lillian asked softly. "Group of men, never knew who they were. Outlaws, probably. I was out checking fences when they came. By the time I got back," his voice faltered. "The house was burning. Emily was inside. I tried to reach her, but the roof collapsed. Had to watch it burn to the ground with my wife and unborn child inside." "Oh, Samuel," Lillian's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry." "It was 15 years ago." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I tracked those men for months afterward, found 3 of them, made them pay, never found the others." "Is that when you came here?" Samuel nodded. "Owner of Big Sky was an old friend of my father's, offered me the foreman job. Said the work would keep me from thinking too much." A humorless laugh escaped him. "He was right about that, at least." Lillian hesitated, then reached out to cover his hand with hers. "Thank you for telling me." He finally looked at her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I don't talk about it. Ever. Don't know why I'm telling you now." "Sometimes the story needs to be told," she said simply, "even if just once." Samuel turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining, What about you? What's your story? Lillian told him then about her parents' deaths from smallpox, the scarring that had altered her marriage prospects, the millinery shop she'd managed, until the owner's son had made improper advances and fired her when she refused him. The boarding house was my last chance, she concluded. I had nowhere else to go, and now it's gone too. Samuel's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. Life's taken a lot from you, from both of us, Lillian agreed, but we're still here, still fighting, he murmured. His eyes held hers for a long moment before he gently released her hand and stood. It's late. You should get some rest. Samuel, Lillian called as he stepped off the porch. Thank you for trusting me with your past. He looked back, his expression softening in the moonlight. Thank you for listening. The weeks that followed were marked by subtle changes. Samuel began taking his meals at the house rather than with the hands in the bunkhouse. He found reasons to be in the kitchen while Lillian cooked, ostensibly to discuss ranch business, but often lingering long after the necessary words had been exchanged. Sometimes they played chess in the evenings, a game Lillian had learned from her father, and at which Samuel proved to be surprisingly adept. Neither mentioned the night they had shared their stories, but something had shifted between them, a tentative bridge spanning the careful distance Samuel had maintained since her arrival. Summer yielded to autumn. The aspen trees turned gold, painting the hillsides with swaths of color against the dark green of the pines. Mornings grew crisp, and Lillian found herself lighting the stove in her cabin earlier each day. On a particularly cold morning in late October, she was stirring a pot of oatmeal in the main house kitchen when Samuel entered, stamping his boots to shake off the frost. Winter's coming early this year, he announced, moving to warm his hands by the stove. Had ice on the water troughs this morning. I noticed. Lillian handed him a cup of coffee. Is that why you've called the hands in from the line shacks? Samuel raised an eyebrow. Nothing escapes your attention, does it? Very little, she agreed with a small smile. They arrived late last night. I heard the horses. We need to move the herd to the winter pastures before the heavy snow starts. Samuel sipped his coffee appreciatively. Means we'll be short-handed at the ranch for a few days. Will you be going with them? He nodded. Have to. It's tricky terrain and I know it best. He hesitated, then added, I'd feel better if you stayed at the Wilsons' place in town while we're gone. Why? Lillian stirred the oatmeal with more force than necessary. I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself. I know that. Samuel set his cup down carefully, but with all the men gone and winter setting in, I've managed alone before. That's not the point. Frustration edged his voice. If something happened, if you needed help, no one would know. Lillian turned to face him fully. Samuel Sloan, are you worried about me? His expression tightened. It's my job to worry about everyone on this ranch. Is that all it is? Your job? She took a step closer, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Because it feels like more than that. Samuel's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. For a heartbeat, Lillian thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her. She realized with sudden clarity. Instead, he stepped back, creating distance between them. I should check on the horses. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Think about staying in town, please. After he left, Lillian stood motionless in the kitchen, her heart racing. What had just happened? What had she wanted to happen? Samuel had been clear from the beginning about his boundaries. He was her employer, nothing more. The fact that she'd developed feelings for him, feelings that apparently clouded her judgment, was her problem, not his. Yet the memory of his eyes on her lips, the way his voice had softened when he said please, suggested she wasn't alone in this confusion. Lillian didn't go to town. When the cattle drive departed the next morning, she stood on the porch of the main house, waving as the riders disappeared over the ridge. Samuel had been cool and professional during breakfast, making no further mention of her staying with the Wilsons. His only concession to concern was instructing Hank, who was staying behind due to an injured leg, to check on her twice daily. The first day alone was uneventful. Lillian caught up on mending, organized the pantry, and read a novel Samuel had lent her weeks ago. Hank stopped by mid-morning and again before sunset, as instructed, but otherwise left her to her own devices. The second day brought clouds rolling in from the northwest, heavy and gray with the promise of snow. Lillian hurried through her outdoor chores, bringing in extra firewood and securing the chicken coop against the coming storm. By evening, the first flakes were falling, large, wet clumps that quickly began to blanket the ground. Hank appeared at her door, looking worried. "Storm's coming in faster than expected," he said, brushing snow from his hat. "Might be a big one." "Will the cattle drive be all right?" Lillian asked, thinking of Samuel and the others out in the elements. "Should be. Boss knows what he's doing." Hank shifted uncomfortably. "Look, Miss Dawson, I'd feel better if you slept in the main house tonight. If the snow gets deep, might be hard to reach you out here if there's trouble." Recognizing the wisdom in this suggestion, Lillian gathered what she'd need for the night and followed Hank to the main house. After ensuring she was settled, he retreated to the bunkhouse with a promise to check on her in the morning. The storm intensified through the night. Wind howled around the eaves, driving snow against the windows in blinding sheets. Lillian added logs to the fire in the main room and curled up on the sofa with a quilt, listening to the storm's fury. She must have dozed off, because she woke with a start to the sound of the front door banging open. Cold air and swirling snow gusted into the room as a figure stumbled through the doorway. "Samuel!" Lillian leapt to her feet as she recognized him, covered in snow and barely standing. "What are you doing here?" He didn't answer, collapsing to his knees as she reached him. His face was deathly pale except for patches of angry red where the skin was starting to freeze. "Had to get back," he mumbled through stiff lips. "Storm. Dangerous." "You're half frozen," Lillian said, helping him toward the fire. "We need to get these wet clothes off you." She worked quickly, peeling away his snow-crusted coat, boots, and outer clothing. His hands and feet were dangerously cold, his breathing labored. Hypothermia, Lillian recognized, remembering her father's warnings about the deadly condition. "Stay with me, Samuel," she urged as his eyes began to drift closed. "You need to stay awake." She wrapped him in the quilt she'd been using and rubbed his hands between hers, trying to restore circulation without warming him too quickly. When color began to return to his face, she left him briefly to prepare hot tea sweetened with honey. "Drink this," she ordered, returning to kneel beside him. "Small sips." Samuel obeyed, his hands steadying as warmth returned to his body. "The men," he asked between sips, "did they make it back?" "You're the only one who's returned," Lillian told him. "Samuel, why would you ride through a blizzard? You know better than that." His blue eyes, cloudy with exhaustion, fixed on her face. Had a feeling, couldn't shake it, knew something was wrong. "Nothing's wrong here," she assured him. "Hank's in the bunkhouse. I'm fine." Had to make sure. Samuel's voice was stronger now. "Couldn't lose you too." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Lillian felt her breath catch in her throat. "You won't lose me," she whispered. "I'm right here." Samuel reached out, his fingers brushing her cheek with unexpected tenderness. "You should have gone to town, and missed nursing you through snow madness." "Never." She covered his hand with hers, pressing it more firmly against her face. "Besides, I belong here now." The firelight cast shadows across his features as he studied her. "Do you? A refined city woman on a remote cattle ranch. I stopped being a refined city woman the day I stepped off that train in Evanston, Lillian said with a small smile. And yes, I belong here, with the ranch, with the work. She paused, gathering her courage. With you if you'll have me. Samuel's expression tightened, conflict evident in his eyes. Lillian, I'm not. I can't. Can't what? Care for someone again. She held his gaze steadily. It's too late for that, Samuel. You already do. Caring isn't enough. I'm broken inside. His voice roughened. Have been since Emily died. You deserve better than half a man. You're not half anything, Lillian said fiercely. You're the strongest, most honorable man I've ever known. And yes, you're wounded, we both are, but wounds heal, Samuel. Not without scars, but they heal. Some wounds don't, he countered. Some just keep bleeding. Only if you keep tearing them open. Lillian moved closer, still holding his hand against her cheek. Emily wouldn't want you to spend your life alone. She loved you. She would want you to be happy. Pain flashed across Samuel's face. Don't talk about what she would want. You didn't know her. No, but I know you. Lillian released his hand and sat back on her heels, giving him space. And I'm not asking you to forget her. I would never ask that. I'm just asking you to try to let yourself feel something again. Try me. The words hung between them, a challenge and a plea. Samuel stared at her, conflict evident in every line of his body. I don't know if I can, he finally said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. I don't know if I remember how. Then let me remind you, Lillian whispered, and leaned forward to press her lips gently to his. For one heartbeat, Samuel remained frozen, unresponsive. Then, with a sound like a man surfacing after too long underwater, he pulled her into his arms. His mouth moved against hers, tentative at first, then with growing hunger as 15 years of carefully maintained distance crumbled. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. This is madness, he murmured. Beautiful madness. The best kind, Lillian agreed, her heart soaring despite her attempt at composure. Now you need to rest. That ride could have killed you. Samuel allowed her to lead him to the sofa, but when she would have moved away, he caught her hand. Stay, he said simply. Please. Lillian settled beside him, and Samuel arranged the quilt to cover them both. Outside, the blizzard continued to rage, but inside, wrapped in warmth and newfound possibility, they found peaceful sleep in each other's arms. Morning brought brilliant sunshine reflecting off a world transformed by snow. Drifts piled against the house and outbuildings, turning the familiar landscape into something magical and strange. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a crystalline stillness. Lillian woke to find Samuel already up, stoking the fire. He turned as she stirred, his expression a mixture of tenderness and uncertainty. Good morning, she said, sitting up and smoothing her rumpled hair. Morning. He hesitated, then crossed to sit beside her. About last night. Lillian felt her heart sink. Was he already regretting what had happened between them? Yes, I meant what I said about being broken. Samuel's voice was steady, his eyes clear in the morning light. I can't promise I'll be easy to love. There are days when the memories are too strong, when I can barely speak to anyone. Days when I need to ride out alone and not come back till nightfall. I understand, Lillian said carefully. We all have our demons. But he continued, taking her hand, I want to try. With you. If you're willing to be patient with a man who's forgotten how to love properly. Joy surged through Lillian's chest, so intense it was almost painful. I'm willing, she said, squeezing his hand. More than willing. A rare, full smile transformed Samuel's face, softening the hard lines and making him look years younger. He leaned forward to kiss her, a gentle promise of things to come. The moment was interrupted by a pounding on the front door. Boss, Miss Dawson, you in there? Hank's voice called from outside. Samuel sighed against Lillian's lips before pulling away. "Duty calls," he murmured. The next few days were consumed with digging out from the blizzard. The cattle drive had successfully reached the winter pastures before the storm hit, and the hands returned safely the day after Samuel's perilous ride. If they noticed the changed dynamic between their boss and the housekeeper, they were wise enough not to comment. Samuel and Lillian moved cautiously, learning the contours of their new relationship. They shared meals with the hands as always, but now Samuel lingered afterward to help with dishes. They played chess in the evenings, but now their conversations delved deeper, exploring hopes and fears long kept private. And sometimes, when the house was quiet and the hands asleep in the bunkhouse, they simply held each other by the fire, marveling at the unexpected gift they'd found. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Samuel confessed one such evening, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Lillian's palm. "After Emily, I locked everything away, thought it was safer that way." "Safer for whom?" Lillian asked, resting her head against his shoulder. "For anyone who might care about me." His arm tightened around her. "Loving me has proven dangerous." "Samuel," Lillian shifted to face him. "What happened to Emily wasn't because she loved you. It was because evil men did evil things. You couldn't have prevented it. I should have been there. And then you both might have died." She touched his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "You can't change the past. Neither can I. All we can do is decide what to do with the time we have now." Samuel caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise," Lillian said with a small smile. "You just weren't listening before." As November yielded to December, the ranch prepared for winter in earnest. Supplies were stockpiled, repairs completed before the ground froze solid, and Christmas preparations begun. Lillian threw herself into creating a proper celebration, something the ranch apparently hadn't seen in years. "Boss doesn't hold with Christmas fuss," Jake explained as he helped her carry a pine tree into the main house. "Says it's just another day." "Well, not this year," Lillian declared, directing him to set the tree in the corner of the parlor. "This year we're celebrating properly." Samuel raised his eyebrows when he saw the tree but said nothing, watching with bemused tolerance as Lillian enlisted the hands in making decorations and planning a feast. When she announced that everyone, owner included, would be expected at the main house for Christmas dinner, he merely nodded his agreement. 2 days before Christmas, Lillian was in the kitchen preparing dough for pies when Samuel entered, stamping snow from his boots. "Need to ride into town," he announced. "Supply run, want to come along?" The invitation surprised her. "With the weather like this, storms not due till tomorrow night, we'll be back well before then." His expression was unreadable. "Thought you might want to pick up a few things for your Christmas extravaganza." An hour later, they were on the road to Evanston, wrapped in heavy coats and buffalo robes against the cold. The sleigh Samuel had unearthed from the barn glided smoothly over the packed snow, drawn by 2 sturdy horses. "I didn't know you had a sleigh," Lillian remarked, watching her breath cloud in the frigid air. "Owner's wife insisted on it years ago," Samuel explained. "Hasn't been used since she stopped coming out for Christmas. 8 years back." "Why did she stop?" Owner remarried. "New wife prefers San Francisco to Wyoming winters." He glanced at Lillian. "Can't say I blame her days like this." "I don't know," Lillian said, looking out over the snow-covered landscape. "It's beautiful in its own way." In Evanston, they divided their tasks, Samuel handling the ranch supplies while Lillian purchased last-minute items for the Christmas feast. They agreed to meet at the hotel for lunch before heading back. Lillian was leaving the Mercantile when a familiar voice stopped her. "Miss Dawson, is that really you?" She turned to find Mrs. Winters, her former boarder, hurrying toward her with outstretched hands. "Mrs. Winters, how lovely to see you," Lillian greeted the older woman warmly. "How have you been?" "Oh, managing well enough, living with my sister still." Mrs. Winters studied her critically. "But look at you, positively blooming. Ranch life must agree with you." Lillian felt herself blushing. "It's been restorative, I should say so." The older woman's eyes twinkled. "And I hear you've managed to thaw our Mr. Sloan as well. Town's been buzzing with rumors since he bought that ring." "Ring?" Lillian repeated, her heart suddenly pounding. "What ring, Mrs.?" Winter's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh dear, was I not supposed to mention that? It's just I was at the jeweler's when he came in last week, so determined about what he wanted, I assumed." "I'm sure it's a misunderstanding," Lillian said faintly. "If you'll excuse me, I'm meeting Mr. Sloan for lunch." She hurried toward the hotel, her mind racing. A ring? Surely Mrs. Winters was mistaken. Samuel had never spoken of marriage. Their relationship, while deepening daily, was still new. Too new, surely, for such a step. Yet hope fluttered in her chest, undeniable and bright. Samuel was waiting at a corner table in the hotel dining room, his tall frame unmistakable even from across the room. He stood as she approached, helping her remove her coat with the quiet courtesy that had become second nature between them. "Successful shopping?" he asked as they sat down. "Very," Lillian replied, studying his face for any sign of hidden purpose. "And you got everything on the list plus a few extras." He signaled the waiter for coffee. "What's wrong? You look distracted." "Do I?" Lillian straightened her napkin unnecessarily. "Just thinking about all that's left to prepare for Christmas." Samuel didn't look convinced, but before he could press further, the waiter arrived with coffee and took their lunch orders. The conversation turned to safer topics: ranch business, the weather forecast, plans for spring planting. After lunch, they collected their purchases and loaded the sleigh for the journey home. The sky had begun to darken, hinting at the approaching storm. "We should get moving," Samuel said, helping Lillian into the sleigh. "Don't like the look of those clouds." They traveled in companionable silence for several miles, the horses' hooves making a rhythmic crunching in the snow. Lillian was lost in thought, still puzzling over Mrs. Winter's revelation, when Samuel unexpectedly drew the sleigh to a halt. "Why are we stopping?" she asked, looking around at the empty landscape. Instead of answering, Samuel reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small wooden box. His expression was uncharacteristically nervous as he turned to face her. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "About how you brought light back into my life when I thought it was gone forever. About how you saw the man I could be, not just the broken one I'd become." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "But now I find I just want to ask, Lillian Dawson, will you marry me?" Lillian stared at the ring, then at Samuel's face, where hope and fear waged a visible battle. "Mrs. Winters saw you at the jeweler's," she said, a smile beginning to form on her lips. Samuel grimaced. "Damn small towns. Can't keep a secret for love nor money." His expression grew serious again. "Is that a problem?" "Not at all." Lillian's smile widened. "Though you might have chosen somewhere warmer to propose." "Is that a yes?" "Yes," Lillian said, her heart overflowing. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Sloan." The ring slid onto her finger, a perfect fit. Samuel gathered her into his arms, kissing her with such tenderness that tears sprang to her eyes. "I never thought I'd have this again," he murmured against her lips. "A future. Hope. We'll build it together," Lillian promised, "day by day." Snow began to fall as they continued homeward, soft flakes that danced in the air around the sleigh. Lillian leaned against Samuel's shoulder, watching the familiar landscape of Big Sky Ranch come into view, knowing with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. They were married on New Year's Day, 1877, in the parlor of the main house. Reverend Thompson rode out from Evanston to perform the ceremony, and the ranch hands stood as witnesses, uncharacteristically clean and uncomfortable in their Sunday best. Lillian wore a dress of deep blue wool that Samuel had ordered from Denver, with a cameo brooch that had belonged to his mother at her throat. Samuel, clean-shaven and solemn in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him across the room where they had first begun to know each other. The vows were traditional, but the meaning behind them was anything but ordinary for two people who had lost so much and found each other against all odds. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel's kiss was both a promise and a thanksgiving for second chances, for healing, for love reborn from ashes. Spring came early that year, as if nature itself approved of the union. The ranch flourished under their combined care, with Samuel focusing on expanding the herd while Lillian managed the house and garden. They moved into the main house permanently, though they kept Lillian's cabin as a guest house for the rare visitors. In June, Samuel received a letter from the ranch's owner, Mr. Harrison, announcing his intention to sell the property. "Getting too old for the cattle business," he wrote. "Would rather cash out and enjoy my remaining years in comfort. What will we do?" Lillian asked that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Will the new owner want to keep you on as foreman?" Samuel smiled, a slow smile that transformed his once somber face. "I was thinking we might be the new owners." "Us?" Lillian stared at him in surprise. "Can we afford it?" "I've been saving most of my wages for 15 years, Samuel explained. "And we'd only need enough for a down payment. Harrison's offering generous terms for the right buyer." He took her hand, running his thumb over the pearl ring that now had a gold band beside it. "What do you think?" "Ready to be a rancher's wife in truth? I already am," Lillian pointed out. "But yes, I'd love for Big Sky to be ours." By August, the deal was complete. Big Sky Ranch belonged to Samuel and Lillian Sloan, a fact that filled them both with quiet pride and renewed purpose. That same month, Lillian confirmed what she'd suspected for several weeks: their family would be expanding come spring. When she told Samuel, his reaction was everything she'd hoped for: joy mixed with wonder and just a touch of fear. "A baby," he whispered, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Lillian asked, watching his face carefully. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." Samuel gathered her close. "Terrified, exhilarated, grateful, but most of all happy. So happy I can hardly believe it's real." "It's real," she assured him, thinking of all they'd overcome to reach this moment. "As real as we are." Winter returned, bringing with it their first anniversary and preparations for the baby's arrival. Samuel insisted on building a cradle himself, working on it in the evenings while Lillian sewed tiny garments by the fire. The hands, who had initially been awkward around their boss's wife, now treated her with protective deference, especially as her condition became more evident. "You'd think I was made of glass," Lillian complained good-naturedly after Jake nearly fell over himself rushing to help her down the porch steps. "I'm with child, not invalid." "Let them fuss," Samuel advised, watching the young cowboys retreat with amusement. "Makes them feel useful." In March 1878, as the first crocuses pushed through the melting snow, William Samuel Sloan entered the world after a labor that left Lillian exhausted but triumphant. Samuel, who had paced outside the bedroom door for hours while the midwife attended his wife, was rendered speechless at the sight of his son. "He's perfect," he finally managed, cradling the infant with careful hands. "Lillian, He's absolutely perfect." "Of course he is," she agreed, tired but radiant. "He's ours." Samuel looked from the child to his wife, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. "I never thought I'd have this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "After Emily, I convinced myself I didn't deserve it, a family, happiness, love. I was so certain that chapter of my life was closed forever." "And now?" Lillian asked softly. Samuel leaned down to kiss her, his free hand gently cupping her face. "Now I know better," he murmured. "Now I know that love doesn't end with loss. It just waits, patient as the seasons, for the right time to bloom again." Years passed, and the Sloan family flourished alongside Big Sky Ranch. William was joined by a sister, Sarah Emily, in 1880 and another brother, James Thomas, in 1883. The children grew strong and sure in the shadow of the mountains, learning to ride almost before they could walk. Evanston grew as well, transforming from a frontier outpost to a proper town with a school, a new church, and eventually, a hospital. Lillian, drawing on her father's medical knowledge, volunteered there one day each week, using the skills she'd once been told no woman should possess. Samuel remained a man of few words outside his family circle, but those who knew him well noted the profound change in him over the years. The haunted look that had once shadowed his eyes gradually faded, replaced by a quiet contentment that deepened with each passing season. On their 20th anniversary, Samuel surprised Lillian with a trip to Denver, their first real journey away from the ranch since their marriage. As they settled into their hotel room after an elegant dinner, Samuel presented her with a small package. "What's this?" Lillian asked, unwrapping it to find a leather-bound journal. "Open it," Samuel urged. Inside, in Samuel's careful handwriting, was a detailed account of their life together, beginning with the night of the boarding house fire and continuing through the births of their children, the growth of the ranch, and countless smaller moments that had shaped their shared journey. "Samuel," Lillian breathed, turning pages filled with memories both joyful and difficult. "This must have taken months." "Started it last year," he admitted. "Wanted you to know how much every day with you has meant to me, how you saved me by staying when most would have gone." "I stayed because I saw the man behind the grief," Lillian said, closing the journal to look into the face she'd loved for 2 decades. "The man worth fighting for." Samuel drew her into his arms, his embrace as sure and steady as the day he'd carried her from the burning boarding house. "Thank God you did," he murmured against her hair. "Thank God you said those words that changed everything." "Try me," Lillian remembered, smiling at the simple phrase that had begun their story. "Best challenge I ever issued." "Best challenge I ever accepted," Samuel agreed, and kissed her with the same tenderness that had marked their beginning, a tenderness now deepened by years of shared joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, and most of all, by love that had healed them both. Outside their window, the lights of Denver sparkled like the stars that had watched over their love from its first tentative moments on a Wyoming ranch. But Samuel and Lillian, wrapped in each other's arms, saw only the light in each other's eyes, the light of a love that had begun when a grieving cowboy had finally opened his heart, and a determined woman had given him the courage to try again.